The first time I ever ate white-tailed deer, I knew I had to have more of it in my life. The taste was incredible, way better than any other red meat that I had ever tasted. And fortunately, in that first experience, I had a hand in processing the deer myself, which absolutely enhanced the experience. Being directly responsible for the food that you consume is one of the most rewarding experiences that anybody can have. And since the act of eating other animals involves taking a life, I've tried to stay directly responsible for that entire process. Hunting, butchering, and cooking are three separate skills that take a lifetime to get good at. And for many people who eat animals, hunting and butchering tend to have a high barrier for entry. It's difficult to learn those skills, but that difficulty may be more surmountable than you think. And with the right tools and a little bit of know-how, you too can hunt and butcher your own meat. Welcome to part 1 of how to process an entire white-tailed deer. In this first part, I'm going to take you through my first crossbow hunting experience, from the field to my garage, where I was able to hang and skin the deer and prepare them for further processing. In part 2, I'll cover the skills and walk you through the entire process of breaking down a white-tailed deer. So, let's pick things up in the woods during the hunt. Pretty sure I just killed one. Just now. 50 yards away from me. So I'm waiting to see if more deer come through. And if they do, then I'm gonna take one. I've got about 40 minutes left until I can't hunt anymore, but I think I got one. So once the deer were down, we had to field dress them, which is a euphemism for taking out the guts. Now, this process is pretty messy, but it's really important to get it right to maintain the integrity of your harvest. Now, I wasn't able to record this process, but this coming season, I plan to harvest more deer, and we'll set things up so I can walk you through this process as it happens. Let me explain what field dressing involves. The most important thing to remember in field dressing any harvest, especially big game, is to have a sharp knife and the right tools to make sure that you keep the guts intact as you're removing them from the cavity of the animal. Hey folks, I just wanted to take a break and let you know that one of the best ways to get the most out of the content on this channel is to subscribe to my newsletter. Every Sunday, I give you more depth and insight into the topics I cover on Out There JCH, including thoughts and perspectives that I don't really share on this platform. The newsletter is free to sign up, and as an incentive to becoming a subscriber, I'm offering a free wild food resource guide that will help make you a more capable harvester and home cook. Just click the link in the description to sign up. Okay, let's get back to the episode. So in addition to a sharp knife, for an animal like a white-tailed deer, you're also going to need a handsaw. It could be a hacksaw or a multi-tool saw, but you're going to need that tool in order to cut through the sternum and the pelvis. Once you're able to cut through these bony structures, then removing the innards becomes a lot easier. You essentially sever the windpipe and esophagus at the base of the neck and pull the entire digestive tract down through the body cavity and out through the open pelvis. Through this entire process, what you want to make sure that you don't do is to pierce certain organs like the stomach, the intestines, and definitely not the bladder or the colon. So, as you're field dressing your animal, it's important to take your time and don't rush. It's better to take more time than to rush through something, pierce something you don't want to, and have the contents of whatever you pierce ruin the meat that you want to eat later. All right, now that you're all caught up, let's head home with the deer, and I'll show you what happens next. Oof. Hard day's work. Now the hard part begins. Gotta hang these boys. Get the skin off. Let's get it. All right, so back home, and I've got 2 deer in the back of the SUV. 2 button bucks that I was able to harvest at about 4:30
and then again at 5 o'clock. Sorry, yeah, so a lot of emotions about it. Very grateful and thankful that I was able to get these deer. Really thankful to Brandon to just all the help that he's given. The challenge now is going to be to hang these deer. I want to skin them tonight so that I don't have to skin them tomorrow. Getting skin off of a cold deer is a nightmare. I've done it before. So I'm going to hang these deer in the back of the garage here. It's about 30 degrees tonight, or it's going to get down to about 32. So they'll be fine in here. I'll probably crack the windows open just to get some like cool air moving through. Okay, so Brandon gave me this guy for hanging the big boy. So I'm going to get this up and then see what I can do. Got this pulley. So we'll see about hanging this guy. This is the gimbal. Might be a little bit hard to see in the dark, but it's essentially like a hanger triangle. And what you do is get the hindquarters, the Achilles heel, or the Achilles tendon through these two ends, and you're able to hoist the deer up. So, yeah, I'm gonna hook this gimbal into the pulley, and then maybe be able to hoist it up a little bit higher. And I have two other gimbals that Brandon gave me too, so I'm gonna use that for the smaller deer. So let's get this hooked up. Okay, so this is the other gimbal. So I gotta tie a knot for this one, but shouldn't be too hard. Okay, so let's turn this thing around and I'll show you what I got going on here. So here we go. Ooh. So here's the deer. Field dressed him so there's no guts left, but what I need to do is cut a hole here, and I want to avoid this castor gland here. This is a scent gland, but the gimbal hook is going to go right here, and then I'll be able to hoist him up and hang him. So you just sort of you can feel the Achilles tendon here, and all you're doing is poking a hole right here. That's all you're doing. Poking a hole here so my finger can come through, so the gimbal can come through, and doing the same thing on the other side. Cutting a hole there. And now, just need to get the gimbal hooks in there, and that should be that. Here's what we're gonna do. Okay, one side in, the other side in. Big lift. Oh, okay. It's a little bit heavier than I thought. So, that's one deer hung. Let's get the other one up. So this buck feels like he's about the size of our youngest. Get this on that side. All right, got them both hung. The older buck is much darker, and you can see the sort of like veal quality of this younger buck. All right, I'm gonna get the skin off, and then I'm gonna get the tenderloins out of there, and that'll be that. So let's do this. Got little brother on the tunes, LB business. Yeah.
You are watching UBN, U Black Network, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. So the way I like to start skinning a deer is by taking off the lower limbs. This can be a bit tricky because I mentioned before that you want to avoid that scent gland that's right at about the ankle of the deer. You don't want to get your knife through that. You don't want to get that on your knife or on your hands because it's going to change the flavor of the meat. But essentially you feel for the knuckle, and just like you would a chicken, you cut through the space between the knuckle. And it takes some practice to get it right, but eventually you do, and you bend until things snap and pop, and it gives way. And the rest of this process is pretty intuitive. The thing you want to make sure you're doing is taking your time, not getting in a hurry, not rushing, and allowing the skin pulling away from the rest of the animal to sort of show you the best way to do that so that you minimize the amount of meat that comes off with the skin. And one of the things to remember throughout this process of taking your deer from the field to home to the freezer is the more care you take in the field and in this process, the higher the quality of the meat's going to be. And so things can get a little bit tricky around the backside and the anal opening of a deer at this stage. But if you've done a good job processing the deer in the field, then you don't have to worry about any leftover fecal matter and everything. The deer just sort of comes apart really easily. Another important thing to remember is to make sure that your knife is sharp, and don't be afraid to stop during this process and sharpen your knife so that it makes your job easier. It's really important to have a sharp knife also because it minimizes the number of cuts that you're going to make, which minimizes the amount of hair that ends up in your meat. Deer hair is really difficult to get off of the meat after you have broken everything down. There's going to be some hair, but you want to minimize that. And if you have a dull knife and you're making lots of cuts, that just means that there's going to be more hair fibers that are flying around and getting in the meat that you'll have to clean up later. I find this stage of skinning a deer to be the most tricky, just because there's a lot of skin that tends to be loose around this area because there's more moving parts of the deer around the forelimbs, shoulders, and neck area. But again, you want to make sure that you're taking your time at this stage and not rushing, not pulling too hard, and really just pausing and looking, as you see me doing here. The other thing that makes this stage of skinning a deer tricky is that if you've shot the deer in the right place, chances are you're going to have some damage to the ribs and maybe one of the forelimbs or both of the forelimbs. And so there's going to be some spots of blood, some hematoma that you're going to have to cut through, and it just makes things a little bit trickier to see what you're doing. As you can see on this side, there's a lot of blood that's in the skin and the muscle, and that is where the arrow that I shot this button buck with exited the body, and it did quite a bit of damage to the forelimb, and so I'm just having to navigate around that. One of the things I didn't do was to cut more of those hematomas out of the ribs and the bits of the deer that I wanted to keep. It stayed in there, which caused me to eventually not keep the ribs. And so you're going to want to get as much of the blood that is in the body cavity, in the skin, and around the muscles off at this stage so that it doesn't lead to spoilage later on. In some cases, skinning a larger animal is easier than skinning a smaller one, and that's certainly the case when you get around the neck area. I didn't take my time as much as I should have with the smaller buck as I did with this larger one, and as a result, the neck roast that I got off of this larger buck was a lot more intact than the smaller one.
Hard day's work.
Nice work, Jay.
Hang these boys.
I see you, big homie.
Get the skin off.
All right. Yeah.
Or this buck.
Hey, Jay. You sure that's secure?
All right.
I think you might want to be careful, Jay. Watch yourself. I think you pulled it enough. Jay, for real, watch it. Damn! Oh. You good?
Okay.
I tried to tell him.
Actually, I don't need your help. That works really well.
You're exhausted, huh?
Here for a good time. Want some feet?
So what kind of collection of feet you got?
Yeah. So the last thing to do is to cut out the tenderloins on these guys, because you don't want them to stay in. These big ones. These big tenderloins, so cut up. Here. So I get a good idea of what I need to get loose. Oops. This knife is still really sharp, which is good.
Most people who eat deer rave about the tenderloins. They've never been my favorite cut of the deer, but one important thing to remember is that if you don't take your time field dressing the animal, the cut of the meat that's going to be the most ruined is going to be the tenderloins. If you don't take care of the colon and urinary tract, then the tenderloins are going to be absolutely spoiled. So another plug to make sure that you take your time in the field and you're going to have some high quality meat.
There we go. That's another one. Boom. Right, the fourth tenderloin. There we go. Ideally, I should wash these guys out. Just noticing the spot where the stomach contents kind of spilled out a bit from where I gut shot the deer, and I don't want that to stay. Entry wound was right here, way back. Should have been here, way back there. I'll let these hang. Just hang here overnight. Let them age. This guy is good size. I was really glad to get him. Those big haunches, some good meats. But I'll do more of a comparison, because this buck is almost certainly in his second year. Well, this one was he was in his first year. But yeah, that's good meat. That's good meat. All right, that's a wrap for tonight. Shot those deer at 4:30, and it's now almost 10:30. So, or shot the first deer at about 4:30. It's now 10:30. It's late as I'm tired as but a good day. Good day.
I was able to age my deer for 3 days in the garage, and I was able to do this because the temperature during the day never got above 40 degrees. Getting the skin off the deer right away was key. Now, I've had an experience where some deer were harvested by a friend, and several days later I came to process them and had to pull the skin off of an ice-cold deer carcass. I can tell you that you don't want to do that. Whenever I harvest a deer, I try to get the skin off as soon as possible. That was a big time commitment and a lot of work. By the time I was finished hanging the deer and skinning them, I was exhausted. And I can see why people take deer to a processor to have somebody else do that work. But as I said, I really want to be a part of this process as much as I can so that I can take full responsibility for the life that I've taken. Now, no shade if you don't have the time, skills, or energy to process your own deer. There are lots of deer processors who are way more skilled than I was and will take great care of the animal that you harvest. But if you do have the opportunity, you're willing to learn, make mistakes, and get better at it, the reward of having a deer processed in your freezer and then taking it out and making a meal is really spectacular. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope this video encourages you to take a little bit more responsibility for the animals that you consume. And don't forget to stay tuned for part 2, where I take these aged and skinned deer and break them down into their constituent parts. And if you're curious about crossbow hunting, especially if you are a first-time crossbow hunter, check out this video to learn more. All right, that's all for now. I'll see you in part 2.